Hey everybody, my name is Matt with Mysterious Galaxy. I have the pleasure today of introducing Bruce Sterling and Christopher Brown. I know you all are really excited to hear them talk, so I'm just going to do the basic introduction of Crowdcast and our speakers. Bruce Sterling is an internationally best-selling author, journalist, editor, columnist, critic, do-it-all. Best known as the author of 10 visionary science fiction novels and as a founder of the cyberpunk movement. He's also the editor of the quintessential cyberpunk anthology MIRRORSHADES. And our conversation partner today is Christopher Brown, whose debut novel Tropic of Kansas was a finalist for the John W. Campbell Award for Best Science Fiction Novel of the Year. Rule of Capture, the first in a series of speculative legal thrillers, was published in 2019, which was followed in 2020 by the Philip K. Dick Award-nominated Failed State. So welcome to both Bruce and Christopher.
Thanks, Matt.
For everyone who is new to Crowdcast, you'll notice that there is a button right below the middle screen that says Buy the Books. That is a suggestion, despite the command. Cannot force you to do that, but I highly recommend it. And if you have any questions for either of our authors, you'll see the Ask a Question tab. Feel free to ask anything you want of them, and they will get to that at the end of the chat. And otherwise, there is a chat there for you, which you can all engage in and talk to each other. Just make sure you keep it respectful. So otherwise, I'm going to hand it off, and you guys enjoy your conversation, all right?
All right.
So good.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks to the store for hosting this event, and thanks to Bruce for joining us from the other side of the Atlantic to talk about this awesome new collection from Tachyon, Robot Artists and Black Swans. So, Bruce, my first question is, I know you lived the life of a kind of a character of one of your 90s novels as a 21st century cyber nomad. Where are you right now?
I'm in a basement in Ibiza. I'm the island of Ibiza off the coast of Spain. I'm not in Ibiza, the party town. I'm actually, my apartment here is in a rather modest residential village, pretty much in the center of the island. And next to the two biggest discos in Ibiza, which are both sort of closed and nailed shut because of pandemic. So normally this would be a frenetic party scene, but at the moment it's very rustic here.
What's Ibiza like during pandemic?
Well, they managed to chop the infection rate down, so there hasn't been any new cases in about a week. So, but the population's rather well behaved. So they've been doing the mask thing, and they managed to sort of crush it. And now the injection rate's going up, so there's a lot more vaccination. And, we were out having lunch today at a restaurant, and things were looking relatively normal by off-season standards. And, there are some flights coming in. But, normally at this point, before pandemic times, I don't like to use the term normally, the sky would just be crisscross the contrails, and there'd be like people flying in from all over every wannabe party town, and that's just not happening. I mean, this is a disco island with no discos. That's modern Ibiza.
Well, so let's talk about the book a little bit. So, who is Bruno Argento, and why did he invent Bruce Sterling?
Bruno Argento simply is Bruce Sterling because that's just the Italian translation of my name. But I arrived in Turin, quite some time ago, like a dozen years ago, in order to participate in their electronic art scene. That was actually the curator of their festival, and now I'm the art director of Share Festival. And we're going at it, even though our festival has a hard time in pandemic like everybody else. But, so I was hanging out in Turin with people who were basically electronic arts people, coders, 3D print guys, open source hardware people, cyber culture types, a few journalists, the occasional architect. This was kind of the peer group who surround our festival and kind of supply us with funding and, help and a place to put on our show and so forth and so on. But soon I realized that there were like a lot of science fiction writers in Italy. There just aren't very many in Turin. So I'm the only professional science fiction writer in Turin. And I decided that I should be an Italian science fiction writer. And if I'm going to be the Turinese guy, I really want to be kind of very Turinese about it. So I began writing work that was very Fantascienza influenced. And I told my colleagues that these were not Bruce Sterling stories. These are going to be Bruno Argento stories. And somehow that idea seemed to catch on. And they're written, a lot of them are written for the Italian science fiction readership. They're not, in fact, intended to be in English. And some of them were commissioned by Wired Italia or other, Italian journals that I was working for and so on. So this project took on a life of its own. And I have since written, about a dozen Bruno Argento stories. And over on the table there, I have a printout of the Bruno Argento novel.
Is that this Renaissance set novel?
Yeah, that was the one that I was kind of shopping around the first chapter of it a little bit. I am pretty far. I'm maybe 2/3 done with the first draft of this thing. I have to say, I haven't written. I mean, Bruno wanted to write a novel kind of from the beginning. So this is like Bruno's long expected novel, but Bruno is very Turinese. He's not a very dynamic figure. And also he just doesn't have the professional habits of Americans, right? I mean, Bruno sort of has to wait for the wind to be at his back. And a lot of Bruno's work is commissioned by people. It's like I get some emails like, hey, we've got an anthology. Can Bruno write something? Bruno comes out of the closet and is like willing to commit some science fiction.
Or
Fantascienza. He writes Fantascienza. Bruno always writes Fantascienza.
Well, and how would you explain or describe the difference between Fantascienza and Anglo-American science fiction?
Well, I think the simplest part there is just like who's the expected readership, right? So Fantascienza is written for people in the Fantascienza community. And if you hang out with science fiction people in Italy, they describe themselves as Fantascienza readers. I mean, some read American science fiction or British science fiction, but they're a Fantascienza community, and they have been since the word Fantascienza was invented in 1957. So if you read Fantascienza, which is written by Italians for Italians, it's about Italian themes. And it doesn't really refer much to the American or the British English language tradition. I mean, there's some in that they do like space opera and, kind of standard stuff, but it tends to be set in Italy and have Italian characters and, and it's just, it's a form of popular entertainment, but it's pop entertainment for the Italian population. So, I do a lot of writing for the Italians. Like, I've got a column in the local newspaper in Turin and so forth. And I felt it was kind of unfair of me in some ways to just continually be this American exile writing about things from an American point of view. I thought it was actually more interesting to actually become somebody who's participating in Fantascienza, right? I mean, why not since I know they're going to read it anyway, and in a lot of cases they're my editors and my publishers, why don't I actually write for them, right? And there were figures in particular who were, friends of mine, like the editor of Urania, the late Giuseppe Lippi. He died, I don't know, a couple of years ago. But I used to meet him at events, and we'd have long discussions about the differences between Fantascienza or, the European tradition and kind of like where fantastic writing ought to go. And those are kind of genuinely illuminating discussions. I mean, it's like, a kind of serious author-editor relationship. So I feel I owe him a debt in some way, and I'm dedicating the Bruno Argento novel to Lippi. And I feel that maybe I'll be able to finish it, just because I can remember what he told me.
And Urania that's kind of was the preeminent Italian language fantascienza magazine.
Yeah, since 1957, the Urania line has been kind of the standard fantascienza line. And they do a lot of paperback original stuff, and they've kind of been at it for a long time. And Lippi was their editor for quite a while. I mean, they've had their ups and downs like most sci-fi publishers, but they're kind of the original SF publishing line in Italy, and they're still at it.
What's that like, writing in English, knowing that the main purpose of the piece is to be translated into Italian? What does that do to language? And I assume
there are people who are actually into that, like Jhumpa Lahiri. She's like an American writer, teaches writing at Princeton, and she's like a big Italophile, and she hangs out in Italy and starts writing stuff in Italian. And, I can't go that far. I mean, I can kind of deal with Italian, but I'm never going to write literary Italian. I mean, I'm just, I even when I speak Italian, people can't hear what I'm saying because they're too busy laughing at my Texan accent. So I have to depend on translators to do that, but I know a lot, So, it's kind of an open question. I mean, I've had a lot of books published in languages I don't speak or write. And first book I ever wrote that was commercially successful was actually a Japanese novel. And that was the first book of mine that ever went into a second printing. And you wonder, it's like maybe the translation's better than the original. It's just, I know a lot of translators. I've been known to translate a little bit myself, but in a very halting way. So
are you able to read your fantascienza stories in the Italian into which they're translated and get a sense of what happens to the Sterlingian voice?
I can read them, but I can see that they're not particularly elegant Italian. I mean, if you're writing, I mean, the kind of sentence structure I do is not very Italian. I mean, Italian's kind of mellifluous and kind of goes on, and it's kind of drifty. There's a lot of Italian writers like Calvino was a big admirer of Hemingway. He actually wanted to do the opposite. He wanted to write a new kind of Italian that was very terse and direct. So I'm kind of good enough at Italian that I can tell elegant Italian from bad Italian, but that's also why I know I'll always be a bad Italian writer. So that was not the point. I mean, my point was that I wanted to write about Italian themes, right? In fact, I wanted to write a kind of Italian science fiction that was more Italian than Italian could actually be, right? Sort of like spaghetti westerns are more like westerns than westerns can be, because they're not American, right? I mean, they're Italian movies and they're made in Spain and they only pretend to be in the US, right? So, A Fistful of Dollars is much more of a Western than standard Westerns can be. And Italians are actually very big on this. There's the very famous comic book called Tex, which has been going on for 60 years. And it's all about this two-fisted Texan gunslinger. And he's a super famous comic book hero and a personal fave of mine because he's so un-Texan, but he's an Italian's idea of a Texan, right? So whenever I get discouraged or think that maybe I'm doing something wrong, I read a few episodes of Tex, and they always cheer me up. I mean, they're kind of genuine popular entertainment. It's people really, really, really like Tex Willer. And the absurdity of it doesn't slow anybody down at all.
Like the Italian version of those Karl May novels, right? It's the take on the Indian or the cowboy.
Yeah. Yeah, or if you're into like travel writing, that's always really interesting. I mean, reading other people's travel writing about your own country is always really interesting. Like a guy visits Austin and like gives his opinion. Like they're all drunk, they have guns, and I was like, yeah.
Well, that's a mode of storytelling that science fiction does a lot of, right? That kind of the alien point of view visiting Earth, or the Earthling visiting the alien planet or whatever. And I suppose as somebody who spent a lot of their life kind of as an expat, maybe that's something you can relate to on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, I think it seems to speak to me in some ways. I mean, there are people who argue that like Bruno Argento is actually more like Bruce Sterling than Bruce Sterling is. Because Bruce Sterling is like this kind of beady-eyed American sci-fi zealot. He's like super into it, and has like this encyclopedic knowledge of the U.S. SF tradition. Whereas Bruno
writes manifestos.
Yeah, he's a cyberpunk. He's like kind of 110% committed. Whereas Bruno Argento is more of this wandering scholar figure. He's kind of erudite. He's interested in minutia. And he doesn't harangue anybody. He has a lot less skin in the game than Bruce Sterling, right? He's kind of a hobbyist, right? And but he also has sort of a genuine Turinese attitude toward things. I mean, because the Turinese are like that. They're kind of genteel, They don't get upset. I mean, they're more like Swiss than Italians. I mean, you hang out with Italians, you think they're going to gesticulate a lot, always laughing, kind of operatic. The Turinese are not like that. They're quite somber. They dress in gray a lot of the time. Very gentlemanly. The women are well dressed, but they look like laboratory workers or nurses. It's a city with a lot of intellectuals, and and a lot of academics. And I think Bruno has this kind of attitude, but in some ways it's an attitude that seems to suit me maybe better than my earlier life in other places does. I mean, I read these Bruno pieces and they seem to have confessional aspects to them that other work that's sort of more professionally skillful doesn't have. Right?
I remember when we were together at an event in Mexico like a decade ago, you talking about the idea of the aspiration to write a quote unquote regional novel of planet Earth. Yeah. You're talking again here and in this book a lot about, regionalism. And I'm curious if you could talk about that idea of kind of the alien point of view on a very specific place. What is it that you think that idea of regionalism has to offer the undertaking of writing science fiction?
That's really kind of a complicated story, but I think I'm kind of getting a handle on it that I didn't have before. And it's a lot to do with like what national literatures do to kind of national language literatures do to actually make people patriotic. Right, like there wasn't an Italian language literature per se until like the 19th century because there was no Italy, right? I mean, there was Florence and Rome and
and lots of regional dialects and
there were the regional dialects, but also there was this Risorgimento period in which Torino was very dominant in Italy, where all of the cultural figures were engaged in this kind of crusade to make Italy and also make Italians. So it's like, okay, you can make Italy by driving the foreign armies off Italian soil, but then you have to like establish like schools and universities and some kind of cultural tradition and decide on a national language and how things are going to be spelled and, what language is going to end up, eventually it's the Florentine language, the dialect is like the standard dialect. So I got historically interested in this, and I kind of know what they're doing, and I want to do that in a science fictional idiom. It's like, I understand how they were using literature to make people Italian, and I want to use a science fiction version of their literature to like explore what Italians might be, right? It's like a kind of speculative nationalism, right?
Awesome.
But, but also like national literatures, they always have this kind of patriotic thing. It's like writing the great American novel, right? I mean, if you're an American, you don't want to write the great Mexican novel. There seems to be like something wrong with that for some reason, right? But you could, right? I mean, you just marry one and you like go to Mexico City and you start writing, and maybe you turn out to be the greatest Mexican novelist. You're just like, I mean, it's actually doable. So in theory, you ought to be able to write, I mean, if you understand what regionalism is, you ought to be able to write a globalized novel. It's like, let's make the planet globalized, and let's just like, I mean, we'll make Italy and we'll make Italians, or we'll like make a globe and we'll make global citizens and we'll write a global literature for them.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, maybe. I mean, H.G. Wells wanted to do that. But, you know, I looked at it and it interested me a lot, but I thought that maybe you should take baby steps toward it. I mean, maybe the thing to understand is sort of like how literature acculturates people, and then start playing science fictional games with that, right? And, you know, I actually think I have, I mean, the question there, you know, the big Italian question is like, okay, we have made Italy. How do we make the Italians? And how did they make the Italians? Well, they kind of did it with literature, but mostly they did it with the Italian national heritage industry. They pretty much did it with railways and architecture, right? Because that's what they have, right? So you get these huge floods of people visiting Italy, and they go ooh and ah and like, oh, it's so Italian. But that whole thing was structured by the tourist industry to sort of indicate to people that it's Italian, right? I mean, the tricolors on it, everything, you know, it's all sort of like UNESCO World Heritage kind of cool Italian stuff. So if you hang out in Torino, which is a big tourist town, you see a lot of this kind of heritage structure of just like, come look at our old building, look at what we did in the past. Here's our cool museum. Here's like the living tour of the old thing, right? Here are people doing costume play. They're dressing up like their ancestors. And I'm like, I can science fictionalize all of this, but I'm just going to world build with it. You know, I'm going to use the tools of commercial sci-fi, and I'm just going to like outthink it and kind of exaggerate it and extrapolate it and really just push the limits of it, right? And I think that's actually the way forward. I mean, if you wanted to do a genuine world novel about the world, you sort of have to understand how literature has done this for regions and then sort of expand that. And that's beyond my personal capacity, but it's not beyond my personal capacity to actually be a Turinese science fiction writer. I mean, I can't write a proper Italian, but I understand a lot of what they have actually done as a people to acculturate, people to a national literature. I mean, they're not a new country. I mean, they're not an old country. I mean, you know, Italy as a nation is younger than the Republic of Texas. So their efforts to do it are kind of naked, and they were discussing it a lot in these kind of very technical terms. And a lot of the guys who were best at doing it were Turinese, like Cavour and D'Azeglio. You know, they were kind of Turinese cultural engineers, and really kind of working on it. Like the world's oldest fake medieval village is in Turin. It's the fake Borgo Medievale, right? And it's the kind of ancestor of all these sci-fi societies for creative anachronism and all this kind of costume play dress up. And they built it in the 1880s for like a national fair. It's like, okay, we're going to have a national fair. We're going to bring all the Italians in. We're going to put them through this fake medieval village. And they come out at the far side more Italian than they were before they went in. right? I mean, they're building a fake medieval village as an Italian acculturation machine. And you can look at these Bruno Argento stories, and you can see that Bruno is actually doing that.
Got it. Well,
Yeah.
here, well, one other question on that point from me, and then I'm going to encourage the audience to load us up with questions from y'all for Bruce. So that's really interesting, and that makes a lot of sense. And if I think about the stories here in Robot Artists and Black Swans, it's interesting that a lot of them are science fiction stories, but they're set in the past, or what reads to me is the past.
Right.
And I wonder if you can kind of speak to that. I mean, you're doing something there that seems like maybe it relates to this project you're talking about, or this mode of thinking about the construction of national identity. And to do that, you go back to these points in history when it was constructed, and you break out the toolkit of alternate history and, and some other, science fictional power chords, and do something that's very different than what, say, a fantasy writer would do if they go into that period, even though you're also playing with some of that toolkit. But could you talk maybe a little bit about that, and what's the attraction of the past, and this novel in progress you're talking about, your Turinese novel? That's a Renaissance setting, right? I mean, what's drawing you into that, and what are some of the unique challenges of it as a science fiction writer?
Well, if you're a fantascienza writer, there's less of a problem with that. Like Valerio Evangelisti, a rather well-known, one of the best-selling Italian science fiction writers and fantasy writers, but he also does a lot of historical novels. And nobody ever queries him about it. I mean, he's writing stuff in the future, but he's also written this series, which is about this Spanish inquisitor, tough guy, kind of a two-fisted inquisitor who's out doing Umberto Eco style stuff in the past. And, the Italians are very engaged with their past, and they have a relationship to it, which is rather more intimate than the Anglo tradition of the past, right? It's kind of okay about it. And also they're just in the business of retailing the past in the way that the US can't. I mean, they've got 2 millennia of culture industry to sell, right?
Right.
So, if you're hanging out in Torino, you're going to sell Roman Torino and Baroque Torino and 18th century Torino and the 19th century Risorgimento Torino, and kind of move from one to another. And from an American, it feels like time travel, but from a Turinese perspective, it's just that's who we are, right? So, but they do have problems of dealing with who they are, the regional language in Turin is Piemontese. They speak a kind of language which is somewhat French and somewhat Italian, but it's actually Savoyard. So, how much of that do you want to play with, right? I mean, do you want to preserve it like Welsh and really make a big fuss about it? Or do you want to try to, and so, and these are cultural problems that play out politically, And you can see them do it. I mean, I've sort of been in the room while they're debating it. It's how much money are we going to give you to support this dead language, or how much money are we going to quote waste unquote trying to rebuild this particular castle or nunnery, or and that's what they are, and that's sort of what they're engaged with. So from an American point of view, it seems a little perverse. But from a Turinese point of view, it actually comes pretty easily, right? And I've noticed that the Italians don't seem particularly upset about it. I mean, I'm writing this stuff, and some of it's 200 years in the future, and some of it's 200 years in the past. But my fantascienza fans just see it as fantascienza. It's look, he's writing fantascienza. And they even see it as Turinese patriotic fantascienza. It's well, none of us write about Turin. He's the champion of Turin. He's super interested, right? And they're guys the guys in the Roman connectivist movement. One of them just wrote a new sci-fi novel, which is set in Naples. And
what is the Roman connectivist movement?
Well, the connectivists are a group who are rather like cyberpunks. I mean, they're very electronic. They're not punks. I mean, they're basically Roman lefty anarchist types with kind of a new age thing going on. but I'm on good terms with them. I mean, they're
Okay.
winning awards, and they're like with it 21st century Roman sci-fi guys, basically. They're one of the most dynamic literary groups in Fantascienza, so of course I'm aware of them, and I consider them cute.
Are they real? Are they real, or did you invent them?
No, they're real. I mean, they're like a dozen guys. I mean, they're a movement. They're a literary movement. They're like cyberpunk.
Yeah.
I mean, they're cyber. They're not punks. I mean, they're Italian guys. But there's the most recent connectivist novel is this futuristic science fiction work, which is set in the future Naples, and it's written by this Roman guy. So they're interviewing him. It's like, how much research did you do in Naples? He said, "Oh, I couldn't be bothered. I just made it all up." And I thought that was great because, from my point of view, I'm like kind of nitpicky about it, but I actually envied his courage as a Roman guy who simply exploits Naples. And I'm just going to make it up. I mean, it's in the future, I'll just make up my own Naples. I mean, they eat Neapolitan pizza. Who cares about the rest, And there's a kind of dash to that, that I admire, because my Turinese stuff is in fact very nitpicky and kind of, researched with an absurd fidelity to, historical texts and all that. So it does get on your nerves a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds like that approach could be very liberating from the having to dig out the books for historical accuracy.
From an Italian point of view, there's something great about it.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to write about the future, and I'll just appropriate Naples. Who cares? I mean, the important thing to me is that it's sci-fi. I don't give a damn if it's accurate reportage about Naples. That's not why my readers are turning the pages, right? But I don't think I'll ever be able to do that. I mean, Bruno Argento is way too set in his ways for that. So I'm writing the Argento novel now, and the Argento novel is actually set in a particular period when Turin was having a building boom. This is the Turinese, the matter of Turin. So everybody in this particular novel is super patriotic about Turin. And in fact, Turin is besieged by its enemies, and they're up on the bulwarks with cannon and muskets and pikes and really, pounding their chests and being very campanalismo. They're very patriotic Turinese. And I haven't really gotten to that part. I mean, I've written these other Turinese things, and they're kind of analytical. But this particular book is about people who are really bleeding for Turin. They're willing to give their lives for the city.
Right, city construction of city as national identity in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're defending a thing that they have recently built.
Right.
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 I mean, they're the people who sort of invented modern Turin. They're utopians, and they've kind of come from all over Italy, and they've built this thing, and they're just trying to build their own world, and then they find themselves besieged by much more powerful enemies, and they're just not gonna knuckle under. They just they're just they've kind of invented this thing, and they're stuck to it, and I don't know. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in this novel trying to convince the reader that my hero is really going to do this. He's actually going to become this kind of passionate Turinese patriot, because he's not from Turin. But most of the people who were doing that weren't from Turin either. I mean, the Turin was just a village, and they kind of turned it into this giant fortress, and they manned it with people from all over Italy. But they decided that they were just going to defend it. It's like, yeah. I mean, we made this, and it's ours.
On the subject of Turin and on cities as utopia, there are a few questions here from the group about your diverse hometowns. The one that's been upvoted here is one about Austin, which is, I guess, it's sort of on that theme, but in a more contemporary way. And the question is, Bruce, How do you think Chris's experience of Austin differs from yours? The tech bubble has changed the city a lot, says the questioner Duncan Stewart from the East Coast, over the decades now. Thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you hang out with like Texan regional writers, I mean, this is an issue for us, you know. And I wrote one Texan regional novel, which is Heavy Weather, which is, you know, very informed by like the work of J. Frank Dobie. So, you know, I mean, J. Frank Dobie's kind of the Texan Austin writer. He's this folklorist and like university professor. And, you know, if you read what Dobie was going through, I mean, he was being relentlessly attacked by right-wingers for one thing, especially because he had dared to collect some of the folklore of Texan Negro people, which like in 1920 and 1930 was just unheard of. It's like under no circumstances, right? So you can look and you can see that there's, you know, a legacy of Texan regional writing, and that it hasn't really gone away. And it's, you know, it plays out in certain cities, Houston, Austin, Dallas a little bit. But it's, you know, it's about the standard kind of Texan cultural themes. You know, it's like race problems, you know, the difficulties of the frontier, fathers, sons, and the land, a lot of enviro stuff. And, you know, that was present in my experience of Austin and yours too. It's just that the hardware is all different. I mean, we're reaching, you know, the gasping stage of the oil industry. And, you know, Austin and Texas have a lot of aspects of a petrocrat state. I mean, they're an oil-supported polity. I mean, cattle to some extent, but mostly extractive industry. And also, Texas is remarkably Mexican. If you look at the way things are put together, it's basically a kind of Anglo-Nicaragua, where, you know, alcaldes and good old boys are the people who actually call the shots. And it's never been particularly democratic in the democratic sense of like votes and, you know, that kind of. On the contrary, it's dominated by swaggering, larger than life Sam Houston figures, and there's a lot of ethnic cleansing and you know, violence. I mean, it's one of the few places in the American continents where white people were ethnically cleansed. You know, the great skedaddle when Santa Anna arrived, he just threw out all the white guys, and most of them hadn't been there for more than 5 or 10 years, right? I mean, They were literally the immigrants, and he just like throw them out at bayonet point, and he rolled them up to San Jacinto, and then they just like crushed him. You know, he got overconfident, and they jumped him, and that was the end of him. So you can see these things, and I'm kind of keenly aware of them, and my experience with other societies actually brings this into sharper focus for me. But Austin is like a much more culturally sophisticated place than it was in the days of Dobie and these other kinds of folklorists. So, you know, I think there's actually a lot of room to do stuff there. And, you know, I'm a little sorry that I could not play that out more, like the regional Texan aspects of cyberpunk were kind of underplayed. I mean, for a long time, Austin was the only city in the world with more than one cyberpunk in it. Right? And a lot of the debates that the subgenre had were basically Turkey City debates from our regional sci-fi workshop, right? But if I had managed to stay there, I probably would have gotten really sick from my cedar allergy. I didn't realize until I left Austin how vulnerable I was to these lung ailments. But
yeah,
now allergies are really severe in my family. My father had them very badly as he grew older, and now they pursue me. I mean, I was free in Turin for a while, but now I'm kind of dreading the hay fever I'll have there. And the air is very clean here in Ibiza. And this, I may be forced here more by health issues than anything else.
Well, another question from Mark B here is, hi, Bruce. In this interview, you've described yourself as American, Texan, and Turinese. What best describes you? Or maybe something that's not on that list.
Well, I'm not sure there's really a term. I mean, I was really happy to be a science fiction writer for a long time, but then I realized that a lot of the stuff that actually occupied my time was more in the way of cyberculture. And lately, a lot of my mental effort has been devoted toward basically art criticism. I mean, I hang out with these. I mean, I'm art director for Share Festival in Turin, but I also kind of know a lot of people in the digital art scene in Europe. And now we're having like this non-fungible token explosion. And this is going to have a lot of effect on my work. And also there's stuff like artificial intelligence art. And there really aren't very many artificial intelligence art critics. So, in this collection, I have this final story, which is, Robot in Roses. And it's all about a future art critic who's trying to figure out this artificially intelligent art robot. And this is actually, a reflection of me, because we get a lot of artificial intelligence submissions for our art fair, right? And we know we're going to get more because, people are just like using these technologies and kind of bending them. And this is like the coming thing, right? So it's actually important that somebody like try to figure this out and sort of reward the people who are good at it and like kind of weed out the stuff that's not worthy of public attention. So, this is a different thing from being like a science fiction critic, but and being a science fiction critic helps a little bit, but it's actually kind of a larger problem that's like best suited to somebody who's like a professor at the Polytechnic or something along that line. So I'm not, in fact, a professor at the Polytechnic, but I know some. And I think I'm going to, my suspicion is that, as my remaining years roll by, I'm going to end up more and more of this kind of graybeard art authority type. Because there are plenty of sci-fi writers. I mean, we're not going to run out of like Nebula people or guys to get the Hugo, but there seems to be actually more demand for this kind of thing than there was, right? And I think this is actually going to intensify. Because, now you can actually kind of make a living at it because of this crypto explosion. And I don't think the crypto is going to make that much difference, but I think some kind of watershed has been passed here. It's almost a generational transition. And, before this pandemic started, art that was on screens or meetings like this seemed really exotic and peculiar. But it's now been, well over a year, and we have to live this way. And, we're going to come out of the far side of this into a new normal. It's not going to be the previous era. This is going to be the post-pandemic era and kind of the post-Zoom era in a lot of ways. And there's going to be a whole lot of cultural labor for that. So I'm heading back to Turin, and I'm going to be meeting with my conspirators at Share Festival. I think we're going to try to do some publishing about it. Maybe we can have some events because the vaccination thing is spreading. And these are going to be the topics that we're going to tackle, and they're going to be big topics for us. And they're going to be big topics for Italy because Italy's an area of the world that's very friendly toward technology art. They'll fund you, they'll help you. And we've been working with them for a long time. My wife, Yasmina, works for them too. She's like a judge for the Starts EU project. And we didn't work our way into this. We were sucked into it, but there seems to be a lot of need for it. And it interests me. It's like, I know how to write sci-fi novels. I don't really know how to explain to you what's good about artificial intelligence art. But I should, and I'm somebody who theoretically could, right? And it might be helpful.
When is the Share Festival? And for people who are interested in it, if it's going more completely virtual, how can people attend
Well,
and check it
I
out.
think hopefully we will de-virtualize because we're basically a machine show. I mean, we used to do some net-based stuff, but now everybody does that. I mean, all the majors have to be online, and we like electronic art, we like digital art, but we're from a manufacturing town in Turin, and generally we're well known for our fondness for gizmos. I mean, we just really like machines. It's like stuff that goes clang, or at least our viewers do, right? I mean, if you go into a share, there's usually 6 things at a share festival. It's usually in the spring, like May. And we have events and we have panels, and we have like 6 shows, and we have like a little awards ceremony, and we distribute a little bit of money, and we fly people in, and they get to tour Turin, and we have groups of artists, and we distribute tools to them, and we talk to the press, and we write manifestos, and we do your basic European art scene shtick. I mean, it's just and there's a lot of those in Turin. I mean, we're one festival among many, many festivals in Turin. We're just the one that's like where the art director is an American sci-fi writer. But I think there's kind of more call for our services now than there was before the pandemic started. So things are playing into our hands in some ways. The world has been virtualized, and also the non-fungible token thing is really just, it's like somebody just showed up and just bombed them with bales of money. It's really pretty weird. And it's gonna really shake things up, and we're gonna have to figure out what happens, right? And we know, and we have to sort of figure out where to put our own energies, and kind of like who we should encourage, right? And it's been our feeling kind of from the beginning that we wanted to encourage Turinese people to do this, right? That we actually wanted to produce more technology art in Turin, because it's a town with a lot of engineering and a lot of design, and it has this long tradition of doing off-the-wall stuff. So we figured, there are ways that we can do this, but now that particular landscape has changed really violently, and we're going to have to figure that out. Oh, and I'm interested in it. Even when I'm not in Turin, I'm very interested. And even if I leave Turin, and I might, I don't think these cultural issues are going to let me be. I mean, this is really the legacy of my lifetime spent with personal computers and networks and so forth. And these are just kind of, the chickens are coming home to roost, I mean, the big money boys have rolled into town, it's like the players are here. And when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro.
Right on. Well, we're pushing up against our time. There's one more on the subject of Turin. I want to put to you one more question from the group. This is from Alec, which is, in what major way does fictional Turin differ from the real one?
Well, it depends on who's writing about it. And, as I say, or as Bruno Argento says in his introduction, there's a long tradition of people who are writers in Turin going insane, or just kind of being broken in some way. They either die, commit suicide, or go mad. And that's kind of an interesting thing. It's like, why? And a lot of the books that are written in Turin are oddly morbid, and people like 20 Days of Turin, or the works of Cesare Pavese, or Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, and so forth, or the adventure novels of poor Emilio Salgari, guy literally committed suicide. So in some ways, the poets and the writers in Turin they seem more sad than the Turinese, or they're like expressing something there that is I don't know, that's implicit in the society. You can see that there's a mournful aspect to Turin in some ways, because it's the city that united Italy and was briefly the capital of Italy, but cannot really be the capital of Italy. I mean, they have the instincts of leaders, but they're too small to actually dominate the peninsula. So if you hang out with them, you see they're constantly referring to themselves as the capital of this and the capital of that and the capital of the other. But it's not clear what they really are the capital of. I mean, they used to be the capital of Savoy, but Savoy is a nation that no longer exists. So they're kind of a regional, they're kind of a cultural headquarters that doesn't seem to know who they're the headquarters of. I mean, they're constantly saving the day, but they don't really seem to like pick up the football and carry it across the goal line, right? They seem sort of not lost exactly, but like peculiarly frustrated. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, in theory, some really great Turinese writer would figure this out and write something that would just like make them all happy. But you know, there's also just an aspect of European society that they know that the human condition is tragic. You know, I mean, by the standards of European towns, Turin's actually pretty well off. And they're not normally sacked, bombed, you know. There haven't been a ton of religious massacres there, you know. I mean, European life is very tough. So, I don't know. I mean, that's, when you get to know them, you kind of, I mean, to know them is to love them. You can say that about basically anybody. But they kind of have interesting cultural problems that, like most people, I don't think they're kind of able to deal with it, right? I mean, like Austin's cultural problem is that Texans hate them, right? Like you can see by the way the state representatives vote that they demonize Austin, and Austin is kind of, I mean, and the slogan of Austin is "Keep Austin Weird." It's like weird compared to what? Weird compared to Texas, right? So it's a state capital which is in an antagonistic situation to the population that it's supposedly governing, right? And this kind of culture war has never been resolved and really isn't likely to be resolved. You know, and if it is resolved, then Austin will instantly become Houston or Dallas. It will no longer be Austin, right? You know, and Austin will have to be Fredericksburg or Wimberley, right? So you can see these kind of, you know, psychological struggles, and a novelist is aware of them, but they don't really have a neat technical solution. Sometimes there's something that just has to be worked out historically. But, you know, Turin is interesting to me in that it's kind of small in some ways, and it's very well documented, and you can kind of follow what they're doing. So I can write Turinese science fiction, and I would have a harder time doing that to, say, Rome or Berlin. You know, I mean, they're small enough that they're like a lab animal in some ways. You can kind of get your head around what they're likely to do, right? So, you know, in that way, they're very endearing. And also the little Borgo Medievale, which is my favorite place in Turin, kind of my spiritual headquarters, is a little fake historic Turin, right? It's like a mini Turin. It's like literally a Turinese culture lab, right? And you go in there now, and it's like full of American sci-fi stuff, just full of Game of Thrones memorabilia. It's kind of been invaded, you know. I mean, it looks like a medieval village, but it's full of all this sci-fi trilogy, fantasy trilogy stuff, Lord of the Rings, you know. I mean, that's what they sell to the tourists now because that's what they want. They don't remember what medieval history looks like. They only know what American pseudo-medieval fantasy trilogies look like.
Right? Legolas.
Yeah, they know who Legolas is. They have no idea who, you know, Louis the 13th was, and they don't care.
Right. Well,
That's an issue. You know, it's like I'm going to like dabble in that.
Right on. Well, Matt's back on. I guess I ran out of time to ask my last personal question, which was
no, please.
Well, let's close it out with a slightly personal question, which is, I know as we were talking about beforehand, you and Yasmina recently welcomed a grandchild into your family, and I wonder what that, a lot of great writers that we both love talk sometimes about what that experience is like of welcoming that generation of new life into one's family. Has that experience, especially as someone who I think a lot of us think of as a particularly clear-eyed, sober futurist who really has a kind of a neither optimistic nor pessimistic way of looking at what's coming. Has that impacted how you think about the future, to have a new baby in the house, or of how you think about your work as a science fiction writer?
Well, being a grandparent is not as stressful as being a parent, and I've been a parent myself. There are aspects of it that are interesting, but also it kind of, the arrival of a new cultural player like somebody who is another generation gives you a chance to sort of scrape the slate clean and rebuild your life around this other situation. And very young babies, preschool children are super time consuming. To have one around is like trench warfare, but it also kind of focuses your life in some ways, because you just know what you're going to do every day. It's like, okay, we're going to feed them, clean them, wash them, push the pram. And in that way, there's a kind of practicality to it that I like. And this child was born in Ibiza. She's not a Belgrade child, she is an Italian citizen. So she'll be Turinese, but she's never seen Turin. And she's actually born in Spain. So she's going to be a rather typical 22nd century European Union kind of kid. And we'll have to adapt our lives to her needs, right? She's got to go to school. She has to be educated, and but this enables us to jettison some of our other habits, right? And that's a good thing in life, actually, right? You think you get rid of things when you bury somebody, but it's actually better to have somebody alive arrive and then get rid of stuff. And it's fun. It makes you feel young.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's good. I've got a lot of ideas. Lots. A lot of them aren't science fictional ideas now, but even though I'm a guy pushing 70, I've always had too many ideas, but they're slowing down, and maybe I can put more wood behind fewer arrows here. Maybe I'll be able to carry out some projects that are, more suited to a guy of my circumstances and temperament here.
Right on. Well, we're excited to see what comes of that and what's next, and this work you described in progress. In the meantime, we have this remarkable collection to enjoy, and I know Matt can hook the audience up with that if they haven't gotten hooked up already. And thanks for staying up late there, Grandpa, with us here from across the ocean. And thanks to everybody who came out. This is fun.
All right. I appreciate it. Glad to have this book existing. It's a weird one, but I wanted it to be in print, and here it is.
Well, very much looking forward to it. Just real quick, Chris, how about you? Anything on the horizon for you?
Well, I've been very busy doing this weekly urban nature newsletter called Field Notes, and I'm working on a proposal for a new book, and just writing a new book. Well, along the way of working on a proposal for something I'm calling Invasive Species is the working title, which is a kind of eco-horror-like novel that channels the voice of that project.
That sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much to both Bruce and Chris for joining us today. This was a fascinating conversation, and sad that it has to end. But to everyone out there, thanks for joining us. Buy the book and have a great night. All right.
Arrivederci.
All right. Ciao.
Bye.